I'm going to start with a story, and some of you may remember a piece of this story from a talk I did. I think I did the talk on Science of Happiness for you all in May. I'm thinking that's right. So I'm going to start with a story about my son, Andrew. So Andrew was started high school about 6 years ago now, and he was taking Spanish and doing very, very poorly in it. Poorly enough that at the end of his first trimester, he received a grade of a 58, which he thoughtfully said to me was really an F plus. But the school did not see it in such a positive light. So the school hauled us in, me and Andrew and my husband, and we all met with the Spanish teacher and the guidance counselor. And the guidance counselor said, he really needs to drop Spanish and he needs to pick up something that he can pass. And they suggested drumming. Drumming was the suggestion. And I said, yes, drumming. Drumming sounds good. And Andrew said, no, but I love Spanish. I love the class and the teacher and talking Spanish. And I said, yes, but you suck at it. And he said, but just give me a chance. Just give me, a trial. I'm going to really redouble my efforts. So we made an agreement. And the agreement was that he would meet with the Spanish teacher every week. He would devote more time each day to actually studying the Spanish. And we would get him a tutor. And the school gave him a 1-month trial period of a probation on Spanish. So at the end of the month, he had actually picked up his grade enough that he was passing. So the school said he could stay in Spanish. And at the end of the year in May, I got a call from his Spanish teacher, and she said, I just finished grading Andrew's final exam, and he's going to end up with an A- for his year. And in all of my years of teaching, I've never had anyone go from an F to an A-. So I wanted to tell you. And then I said, is there a prize associated with that? And she said, no, there is not. But I'm starting with that story because it really illustrates something powerful. It illustrates emotional intelligence. And you'll see why in today's talk. And spoiler alert, I'm going to end today's talk by catching you up on what Andrew's doing right now. So I want to start by talking about what emotional intelligence is. We all hear about IQ, intellectual quotient, all the time, but we don't talk as much in our society about emotional intelligence. And I hope that you'll see by the end of this talk why we really need to be emphasizing emotional intelligence. So in psychology, we talk about emotional intelligence as an awareness that basically emotions matter, that emotions can drive our behavior, and emotions can have good and bad effects. But emotional intelligence also includes something really important. It includes an ability to regulate, to manage your emotions. So that could be like your own emotions, but also those emotions of people around you, family members, friends, neighbors. And this ability to regulate and manage your emotions is really important under times of pressure. So stress, grief, resilience, disappointment, pressure, and so on. Now, we know in psychology that emotional intelligence predicts just a ton of different things. People who are high in emotional intelligence have better health, physical health, and also psychological well-being. They're happier. They also have better relationships. They have better romantic relationships. They have better friendships. They have better relationships with neighbors, with family members, and so on. And they also accomplish more things in their careers. So they get promoted faster, they're identified as leaders, they often can be successful in starting and running their own businesses. So emotional intelligence is basically, as you can see from this list, it's like really important in so many different respects. I'm now going to tell you about a really fascinating study. Now, this study was done with a really unique sample. These were all men, and they all had gotten an MBA from Harvard. So these people were very smart in the kind of like traditional sense of the word. But what they did in this study was they examined how well these men had achieved in their careers. And they looked at how important emotional intelligence was and how important raw IQ was in terms of predicting their success. And remember, this is a group of really, really, traditionally smart people. Now, here's what they found. To be sure, intellect, so that's kind of, raw intelligence, was a driver of outstanding performance. Cognitive skills such as big picture thinking and long-term vision were particularly important. But when you calculated the ratio of technical skills, IQ, and emotional intelligence as ingredients of excellent performance, emotional intelligence was twice as important as all of the other factors for jobs at all levels. So what does that mean? Well, it means if your emotional abilities aren't in hand, if you can't regulate your emotions, if you don't have self-awareness, if you're not able to manage disappointment and distressing emotions, if you can't have empathy and feel connection with people and have good relationships, then even if you are very smart in the traditional IQ kind of way, you're not going to get very far. And that's really the key finding about the importance of emotional intelligence. And this was a study that was published in the Harvard Business Review. So I hope you now understand the real importance of what emotional intelligence is. And I'm going to start. And for those of you who've had a talk with me before, you know that I do this with some regularity. I want to start with our very first poll question today. And it's this. Do you know anyone who seems like they should be very smart based on their, intelligence or degrees or things like that, but they lack some kind of basic common sense? So you can just say yes, or you can say no, it's totally anonymous. I'll give you, like 30 seconds to put in your answer, then I will share the results. And let me just tell you, I work at Amherst College, so I am surrounded by professors who, in theory, are very intelligent, and many of them lack a basic ability to get along with other people, to like function, effectively, to build good relationships. So let's see, already nearly 70% of you have participated. So if you want to get your vote in, I'm going to count down now from 5 seconds, just in the interest of time. I will show you your results. So if you want to get your vote in, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. So you can see here, 90% of you know someone like this. It is very common. So we talk about IQ all the time, but EQ is really, really important. So I now want to turn to examining, well, what do we mean when we say EQ? And so when we talk about emotional intelligence in psychology, it's not just one thing. It's actually 5 different things. And this is really important because what this tells us is that each of us might be high on one of the components of emotional intelligence and then not so high on another one of the elements of emotional intelligence. And that's important to know, as I'll talk about in a few minutes. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, what does it include? First, self-awareness. People who are high in emotional intelligence, they have a good sense of who they are. They really know themselves. Now, that includes self-confidence, so they feel good about themselves, but it also is coupled with a realistic sense of their self-awareness. And that means they know what their strengths are, and they also know what their weaknesses are. So they understand their strengths and they understand their weaknesses. Now, this is a really important point. As this cartoon shows, I want greater self-awareness, but can I continue to be unaware of my bad qualities? And the answer is no, you can't be, because here's the challenge. We all like to focus on, oh, I'm so good at this. This is what I'm really good at. But the key is people who are high in emotional intelligence, they understand what they're good at, and they also understand what they're not so good at. So I have written several books with a co-author. She lives in California. I live in Massachusetts. But we are a wonderful, wonderful writing team because basically everything that I love doing in a book, she hates doing, and everything she loves doing, I hate doing. So let me give you an example. We've written a bunch of college textbooks on introduction to psychology, and I'm really nerdy. So what I like doing is like reading the research and like summarizing it and coming up with examples, as I pretty much am doing with you all today. She finds that super boring. She's like, why would I want to read those studies? That is mind-numbingly boring. I have no interest in it. Now, here's what I can't do at all. I am like super not artistic. I'm not a visual person. I'm not good at arranging flowers. I'm not good at taking pictures. I'm not good at drawing, not good at any of that. And she is excellent. She's very visual. So she will look at it and be like, no, that picture needs to be bigger. And that font is too small. And that font is a bad color. And this page is too crowded. And so she makes the book look pretty. She makes the book look accessible. And so we're this wonderful pair of co-authors because each of us knows what we're kind of bad at and what we're kind of good at. And we really complement each other. Now, the other thing that's key in this component of self-awareness is that people who are high in self-awareness also have a self-deprecating sense of humor. They don't take themselves too seriously. You know, most people aren't doing something in their life that's like life or death, make it or break it. So when something disappointing happens, they don't kind of lose their chicken. They don't freak out. They can kind of take themselves with a grain of salt, and that probably makes them kind of easier to be around and more pleasant. So one component, self-awareness. You know yourself. 2, people who are high in emotional intelligence are also high on something called self-regulation or grit. And I want to talk briefly about a really famous study in psychology that was called the Marshmallow Study. I want you to raise your virtual or non-virtual hands if you've heard of the Marshmallow Study. And I will just look for a second at hands. So I'm seeing some people have, okay, but you can give your virtual hand or your actual hand. All right, so some people know what I'm talking about. So this is a study, and if you don't know what it is, don't worry, I'm going to describe it to you, but I see a number of people have heard of it. So this was a very famous study that was done in the early 1970s, so a long time ago at Stanford University. And what they did was they brought in little kids, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and they sat them in front of a marshmallow. And they told these kids, you can eat this marshmallow right now, but if you can wait 10 minutes, we're going to bring you several marshmallows. So there's your choice. You can eat this marshmallow right now, but if you can wait, if you can delay 10 minutes, I'm going to bring you a bunch of marshmallows. So the researchers walk out of the room. Now, of course, it's a psychology study, so they're watching these kids through like a one-way mirror to see what these kids are going to do. So the researcher walks out, and some of the kids pick up the marshmallow, put it in their mouth. Study is done. 2 seconds. Study is over. But other kids do something remarkable. They delay. And if you watch a video of these kids, it's hysterical because they're doing all sorts of things to distract themselves. They look at the ceiling, they look at their fingers, they look at their feet. Some of them actually cover the marshmallow so they're not tempted by it, but they do all of these things to delay. And so first of all, what's interesting is that you see even these very little kids show a real difference in how well they can delay gratification. Can they do self-regulation? Sort of think about the long-term benefits of not eating the marshmallow immediately. But what's much more interesting is they have followed up these kids every 5 years since 1970, 1972, when they first participated. And what they have found is the kids who don't eat the marshmallow when they're 3 have all sorts of benefits later in life. They are more likely to have graduated from high school. They're more likely to go to college. They have a higher SAT scores. They're less likely to have credit card debt. There's all of these different advantages to not eating the marshmallow. And if you're interested in this study, there's a wonderful book written by the author of this researcher, Walter Mischel, that's called The Marshmallow Test. And it actually goes into how these kids are so different from other kids. And what really seems to be predictive is that these kids are very good, even from a young age, at thinking about long-term consequences, not just the immediate, it's going to feel great to eat that marshmallow, but really thinking about long-term consequences. As Angela Duckworth, one of the researchers on this study, says, grit is sticking with your future day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. So that's really a compelling example of another key component of emotional intelligence. They're very good at doing this big picture, future kind of thinking. Now, on a personal note, in what is a very, very weird quirk of fate, my husband is one of the original Marshmallow Kids. And they have followed up him and our family ever since I think he participated in 1972. Now, here's the question everybody asks. Did your husband eat the marshmallow? Now, he has no idea if he ate the marshmallow when he was, 4. He doesn't remember what we did last weekend. But I will say he watches a lot of Sports Center, so that would kind of bode poorly on this delay of gratification. All right, so the second component is self-regulation. Third component is internal motivation. People who are high in emotional intelligence are very much driven by internally what feels good. And what's so important about this is that internal motivation is about doing things because you want to, not because other people are making you. And here's what we know from research in psychology and education. As soon as you start rewarding people for doing things that should be enjoyable, you actually undermine internal motivation. So many of us who are parents can remember your kid coming home from school and hearing, oh, if I read this many books this month or this summer or whatever, I get a prize. I get a sticker. I get candy. I get pizza. I get something. And that's an example of actually something really hazardous, that as soon as you start putting some kind of external reward on something that should be enjoyable, you actually can decrease and undermine internal motivation. There's a wonderful quote about this by Stephen Covey. Motivation is a fire from within. If someone else tries to light that fire under you, chances are it will burn very briefly. And that's really the reality. So people who are high in emotional intelligence, they do things because they want to, because they're driven to, because they love it. They're not doing it by the big external extrinsic rewards. And as this picture shows, this is an example from research. If you ask college athletes, how much do you love playing your sport? We hope they would really love playing their sport. But here's what's interesting. College athletes who are on athletic scholarships, meaning you have to keep playing your sport in order to go to school for free, they don't like their sport so much because they know I have to keep playing this sport because I need to have school be free. If you ask college athletes who are on academic scholarships, so school is free because of their grades, or if you ask athletes who are on scholarship because of their family income, and therefore that's they have a scholarship, but it's not tied to their sport, they report higher love of the game, higher internal motivation. As soon as you say, I'm playing my sport so I can go to school for free, it actually undermines internal motivation. 4, empathy. And empathy is one I worry about a lot these days, because empathy is basically, can you put yourself in somebody else's shoes? As Barbara Kingsolver says, empathy is really the opposite of spiritual meanness. It's the capacity to understand that every war is both won and lost, and that someone else's pain is as meaningful as your own. And this topic of empathy is one that I think is so important. And I'm going to have the good fortune of coming back to talk to you all again in November. And in my November talk on bystanders, I'm going to talk a lot about the role of empathy in basically creating kindness in the world. But for the scope of today's talk in terms of empathy, what the research has shown is that people vary tremendously on how well they can put themselves in somebody else's shoes. Some people can just regularly imagine, oh my gosh, I can imagine being in your situation. And other people, they're just not as good at doing that kind of perspective taking of seeing the world from somebody else's point of view. Now, I'm going to tell you about a little bit of a creepy study, so pay attention. This was a study that was done in which people came in and they said, you're going to work with a partner. And this is a study that's called Experiencing Difficult Tasks. And the way it was set up, you're going to work with a partner. Partner is a total stranger. You don't know this person. But what's going to happen is one person is going to experience a bunch of difficult things, and the other person is going to record their reaction. So there's an experiencer and there's a recorder. Then they tell you about the tasks, and the tasks are like horrible. So one of the tasks is you will let a tarantula crawl up your arm. One of the tasks is you will hold a rat. One of the tasks is you will put your hand in a bucket of snakes. So it is awful, and no one wants to do this. So then you draw names out of a hat, and it's rigged because it's a psychology study. So you draw your name out and it says, I am the recorder. So you get to be the recorder and you're thinking, yes, thank goodness I'm the recorder. Then it gets tricky. Then the researcher a few minutes later comes over to you and they say, hey, the way this study is set up, one person has to experience all the things and the other person has to record their reaction. But your partner is really, really freaking out. They're really, really terrified of spiders and they're just really freaking out. So I'm wondering, would you be willing to switch? Now, this partner is a random stranger. It is not your sister. It's not your roommate. You are never going to see this person again. So when the researcher says, would you switch? Some people say, you know what? I'm really good at recording, so I should probably stick with the recording. And other people say, okay, I'll switch. Now, the good news for all of us is that no matter what you say, yeah, I'll switch, no, I won't switch, the study ends at that exact moment. There are no spiders, there are no snakes, there are no rats. So the study ends exactly at that moment. But you don't know that, of course, before you've had to make your choice. But that study really illustrates that people vary a lot in their ability to feel empathy for other people, to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. And this is one, as I said before, that I worry about a lot. Many people here have probably heard about the rise in narcissism that we're seeing in society. Here's a cartoon that illustrates this. Studies show that society is becoming more narcissistic. Interesting, but how does that affect me? So the problem here is that society is becoming more narcissistic. They've done studies with college students every year for the past 50 years on graduation. And what they found is that narcissism rates are increasing every single time they do this study. And that's probably because, of course, the, selfie generation, right? Again, people being so very self-focused. But the problem is narcissism, it's like the opposite of empathy, right? Narcissism is like me, 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 me. And empathy is really like you, and us. So this is one I worry about a lot. Finally, social skills. All of us have to get along with other people. We got to get along with family members. We got to get along with neighbors. We got to get along with friends. We got to get along with people we golf with. We got to get along with people we volunteer with, we work with, all the time. We got to get along. People who are high in emotional intelligence have very good social skills. They are very good at including other people. I'm showing this diagram because it really illustrates the idea of including people, making sure that other people in a conversation are paid attention to and acknowledged, making sure that you include other people in social activities, in decision making. People who feel heard are much more likely to be responsive and respectful and contribute things. People who are high in emotional intelligence are really good at this kind of social skills. They value people, they try to include people, they try to make sure all voices are heard, and that probably leads them to be liked more and probably leads them to have better decisions as a result. So I've talked now about the 5 different components of emotional intelligence, and I want to turn now to a scale that is often used to kind of tap into where you fall on these different things. Now, I'm going to talk about these 6 different items because these are kind of key markers of things that lead people to rate high in emotional intelligence. And all of us are higher in some and lower on the other. So 1, some of the major events of my life have led me to reevaluate what is important and what is not important. So people who are high in emotional intelligence, they've often been through some stuff. They've often had some difficulties, and that probably lets them be higher in empathy, better in perspective taking, probably more resilient. So 1, people have been through some stuff. 2, people who are high in emotional intelligence are often very good at picking up on nonverbal cues. So, like facial expressions or posture or body language, they can often kind of pick up on those cues, and that lets them be more sensitive in their interactions. 3, they often seek out activities that make them feel happy. So, they try to do things in their own life that lead them to feel happier. And that probably makes them happier and probably makes them more pleasant to be around. It's nice to be around people who are happy. 4, I am aware of my emotions as I experience them. Now, this one seems like, well, isn't that kind of obvious? Wouldn't you be? But the reality is, there are many times in which we can't exactly tell how we're feeling. So maybe sometime you've been like really, really tired and it's led you to kind of snap at somebody who you're close to just because you were so tired. Maybe sometime you were really, really hungry and it led you to kind of be a little bit grumpy. And what you were really feeling was hunger, not grumpiness or anger, but you lashed out. So people who are high in emotional intelligence are good at kind of saying, hey, why am I feeling this way? Is it that I'm tired? Is it that I'm grumpy? Is it that I'm feeling sad? What's actually driving my behavior? 5, I'm aware of the nonverbal messages I send to others. So number 2, I said, is that people who are high in emotional intelligence can look at other people and kind of pick up on nonverbal expressions. 5 is you are aware of the nonverbal expressions you are emitting to other people that you are sending out. I gave this talk once before the pandemic. It was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a woman came up to me at the end and she said, I have the perfect example for number 5. And she said, I've been told by my sister and my boss that I have resting bitch face. And that's a perfect example. And then she goes, and as soon as I was told that I kind of look like this, but I'm not feeling sad. I just kind of look like this. And she said, but now that I've been told it, I deliberately try to overcome it. I deliberately try to be aware of the messages I'm sending other people. And then finally, I compliment others when they have done something well. And this is really an important one because this is giving people credit, telling people thank you, being pleasant to other people. And so complimenting other people is a key aspect of social skills, of empathy, of building good relationships. So now I want you to think about these, and you might be high in all of them. I'm sure there are a lot of emotionally intelligent people listening to today because honestly, what I find is that people who are emotional intelligent want to hear about emotional intelligence, and people who are not emotionally intelligent are like, why would I waste time hearing about emotional intelligence? That's such a dumb thing. But so I want you to now rate what do you think is your biggest strength, and you have to just choose one. So I want you to answer, what do you think is your best emotionally intelligent strength? Is it knowing what's important versus not important? Is it being able to pick up on nonverbal cues about what other people are thinking and feeling? Is it seeking out activities that make you happy? Is it being aware of your own emotions? Is it being aware of the nonverbal messages you send to other people? Or is it complimenting other people when they've done something well? There's no right answer. I just like to give people a chance to sort of self-reflect. And I'll stop talking for a minute. So you all are doing a great job of getting your votes in. Already 50% of you have participated. I will show your responses anonymously so you can see how people are doing. And now we've had over 60% of people participate already, so that's great. And in the interest of time, because I know that you all are a chatty, talkative bunch, so I want to make sure that we leave adequate time for questions. I'm going to give you about 5 more seconds. We've already hit over 70% of people have participated. So I'm going to count down from 5, and I am going to end this poll. There will be one more poll at the end today, though, so you'll have one more chance to share a thought. Okay, so I'm going to count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to end this poll. And we hit 79% of people participating. And here are the results. So isn't this interesting? The number one strength for most of you, well, over a third, was complimenting other people when they've done something well. So that's really lovely. So that was the number one most recorded answer. And then a good number of people answered telling what others are thinking or feeling, or seeking out activities to increase happiness. And then fewer people gave the other choices. So, all right. So I now want to turn to what I like to call is really the good news. And that is that emotional intelligence can change. And this is really important because otherwise it'd be kind of horrible for me to give this talk, because what I would be saying would be, some of you are high in emotional intelligence, some of you are not. Oh, well. And that would be horrible. And so the key thing is that we know that emotional intelligence can change. And one of the key factors is being aware of what your strengths and weaknesses are. So that's why I spent time kind of talking about the different components. That's why I showed you those different items, because having a sense of things that you're good at and things that you're maybe not quite as good at is really, really important to say, maybe I should focus more on complimenting other people, or being aware of nonverbal cues, or seeking out activities that make me happy, or whatever you feel maybe was not your best strength. So one, being aware of where you're strong and where you're not quite as strong is really important. And the other thing that's really important about emotional intelligence in terms of change is having an understanding of the power of mindset. I gave a talk for you all before on the link between mindset and aging and happiness. And what we know is that mindset, your thought patterns, can also influence your emotional intelligence in really important ways. So I'm now going to turn, as promised, to talk about specific things that we can all do to improve our emotional intelligence. And Ashley's going to be sending out a copy of the slide deck to you all. I've already sent it to her, so you can have this to reflect back on if you'd like to think about any of this material or share it with someone else. So one, find your match. So this is one of the best predictors of happiness. It's also a best predictor of being emotionally intelligent, and that is finding an area in which you feel your best. So as Steve Jobs said, the only way to do great work is to love what you do. So this is really thinking about what makes you happy. As you remember from one of the items, testing emotional intelligence, one of the key factors is seeking out activities that make you happy. So figuring out in your personal life what makes you happy, in your volunteer work, in your community, what makes you happy is really, really important, that people feel happier in different situations. And those are different for different people. I have this image here because it illustrates actually a really important finding in psychology. There are some people who think it would be really fun to bungee jump. I am not one of those people. But again, that's an example of figuring out what makes you happy, what doesn't make you happy. My husband and I have made a vow to each other, and here's the vow. We will never try to climb Mount Everest. And that's because I cannot imagine training and working and spending a ton of money to go and climb a mountain where I might die. Like that just does not seem like a fun thing. But there are lots of people that think that would be really fun. And it's like their bucket list item. So thinking about for yourself, what makes you happy? This could be in your volunteer work. It could be in your recreational activities. It could be, do you prefer to camp or go on a cruise or go to a spa? It doesn't matter what the right answer is for someone else. It matters what is your match, what feels best to you. All right, so that's number one, find your match. 2, practice empathy, not sympathy. Now, this is a really important one because we often confuse the two. We think about sympathy and empathy as being the same, but they feel really different because sympathy is, I'm sorry for you, you're different. And empathy is, I understand, I'm sitting with you. And I'm now going to, I talked before about how empathy is one of the really key components of emotional intelligence. All right. So I'm now going to attempt to show a video, and we're going to all keep our fingers crossed that it works. Is it working? It's not working. Yay! All right, we have to go through this. There we go. Now, here it is. 3 minutes.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right, so I'm starting with that. Let's see, let me get out of that now so we don't hear it again, because it really illustrates the distinction between empathy and sympathy, and practicing empathy is so very important. 3, put away the phone. We know that it's very hard to pay attention to nonverbal cues when you're distracted by your phone. People often report having some kind of miscommunication when they've texted somebody or emailed somebody, and it's like you don't hear sarcasm. We know that having a phone on a table distracts from people's ability to pay attention to people in their lives at that moment. So people who are emotionally intelligent are focused on paying attention to nonverbal cues, really listening to somebody's tone of voice and body position and posture. They put away the phone. They focus on them face to face. And this helps them pay attention to nonverbal communication. This could include eye contact, facial expressions, voice fluctuations, body language, hand gestures. We know that there's actually a part of the brain that is in charge of processing this kind of nonverbal messaging, such as handshakes. And this means that at an evolutionary level, paying attention to nonverbal communications was probably a key aspect of our survival. People who could pick up on like somebody's expression of fear because they saw a snake or a shark were able to pick up on that communication and therefore avoid that danger themselves. So paying attention to nonverbal communication is really an essential part of emotional intelligence. You can probably remember that 2 of the key components of the 6 were paying attention to the nonverbal communication that you give off and paying attention to the nonverbal cues that people around you are giving off. 5, be a team player. Again, think about other people in your community, in your neighborhood, in your family, that virtually all of us work all the time on teams. As Babe Ruth said, the way a team plays as a whole determines its success. You may have the greatest bunch of individual stars in the world, but if they don't play together, the club won't be worth a dime. So really thinking about getting along with other people, about complimenting other people is really important in all sorts of different situations. 6, shift your mindset. And this is such a clever example. It's a study that was done by an economist. And what they did in this study was they interviewed people who all had the same exact job. And the job was working as a custodian in a hospital. But they asked these people to describe their job and then to rate how much they liked it. And what was fascinating is that even though everybody had the exact same job, they described it in very different ways. Some people said, my job is a custodian in the hospital. I clean floors, I clean bathrooms, I wash windows, I change beds. That's what I do. I clean hospitals. And they didn't like their jobs very much. Other people said, I am an essential component of healthcare. I maintain a sterile environment to improve outcomes for my patients. I pay attention to how patients are doing, and I alert the nursing staff if somebody needs something. I am an important source of emotional support for family members. I provide humor and contact and information. I am an essential part of the healthcare team. And those people, they liked their job a lot. And that example, all it illustrates is mindset. All these people had the exact same job, but some people thought about it as doing menial, low-level tasks, and some people thought about it as being really essential. We all have this ability to shift our mindset. 7, take a chance. Choose action over inaction. Lots of people kind of go through life worried about taking a chance, because if you take a chance, you might get rejected, you might get disappointed, you might fail. But if you ask people, what are your biggest regrets in life? Most people talk about regrets of inaction. I wish I had. I should have. And overwhelmingly, that's what drives them. As Mark Twain said, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. 8, admit and own mistakes and then move past them. We can take a chance and risk failure and disappointment because even if we try something and it doesn't work, we can move past it. There's a wonderful example from the 1992 Olympic trials. A young American got disqualified in his attempt, and he was the world record holder, got disqualified from his attempt to make the Olympic team, even though he was the world record holder. You might remember the Dave and Dan commercials way back when. And yet he persevered, he continued trying, and 4 years later, he won a gold medal in the Summer Games in Atlanta. And here's the reality. Most of us are never going to have our failures broadcast on live television. He did, and he was still able to come back. So even if you fail, there is still valor in trying. As Teddy Roosevelt said, the credit belongs to those who are actually in the arena, who strive valiantly, who know the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spin themselves in a worthy cause, who at best know the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if they fail, fail while daring greatly, so that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. And this is really essential, that even if you fail, you can come back from that experience. 9, keep stress in perspective. There's a wonderful book written by a neuroscientist called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, because zebras only react physiologically, heart beating fast, rapid breathing, et cetera, when they're being chased by a lion, when they're about to die. Humans do it all the time. I'm stuck in a traffic jam. I've got a lot of emails. I've got to do holiday shopping. My house is a mess. Whatever it is, humans do it all the time. And the reality is we can all get better about keeping stress in perspective. This point was brought home to me about 7 years ago. I had given an exam in my intro to psychology class, and I just posted grades. And I got an email from a student saying, I'm really stressed about my grade in your class. Can I come meet with you? And I said, yeah, sure. That's fine. For the record, his grade was a B+. It was not that bad a grade, but he said he was really stressed. So he came to meet with me one December morning, and I remember it well, even now, because the day that he came to meet with me was the day of the Sandy Hook shooting. And he sat in my office and said, I am really stressed about my grade in your class. And at the time, I had a daughter who was in 2nd grade. And I had spent the whole morning on the computer going, I hope that they've taken the kids to the hospital and they're just not telling the media yet. I hope that they're going to find a classroom of kids that's like really, really well hidden. And of course, it became very clear that that was not going to be the case. And so I turned to the kid and I said, do you know that there's like 20 first graders dead at an elementary school in Connecticut right now? And he said, yeah, I did hear something about that, I think online. And I said, your B+ doesn't matter. I said, it's not going to have any impact on your life. Let it go, move on. Because the reality is stress is not getting a B+ or being stuck in traffic or missing your plane or whatever. Stress is sending your first grader to school and not having that kid return home. And so we can all do a much better job of keeping stress in perspective, basically be more like the zebra. And finally, recognize the value of adversity in teaching resilience. I did a talk for you all a bit ago on the psychology of resilience. And what we know is that experiencing adversity actually can lead people to develop important skills. This is a picture of a man who was severely injured, as you can see in this photo, as a sophomore at Princeton University. He was very drunk one night. He walked back to his dorm about 3 a.m. He was 19 years old, and he climbed on top of a little electric train on the edge of the Princeton campus and grabbed the 2 electric wires. So he was severely injured. As you can see, he lost one arm and both of his legs. He was airlifted to a local hospital and he lived. And after undergoing extensive plastic surgery and physical therapy, he eventually returned to Princeton and he changed his major and he became pre-med. He finished Princeton, he applied to medical school, he finished medical school, and today he's a doctor living and working in San Francisco. And a few years ago, he was interviewed by the Princeton Alumni Magazine. And the reporter asked him the question that I imagine we all would ask him if we had the opportunity to meet him. If you could, would you go back in time and undo that night that has so drastically changed your life and changed your body? Would you undo that experience? And here's his answer. No. Too much good stuff has come out of it. I was not headed towards a career in medicine before the accident, and I don't think I'd be as good a physician if I hadn't had that experience. And he talks now about how when he walks into somebody's hospital room, there's an instant feeling of rapport because they look at him and they look at his body and they immediately understand that he gets what they're going through. He works with amputees and quadriplegics, and he talks about how his body lets him be able to immediately create a sense of empathy and rapport. And my final quote for you today perfectly illustrates this point about the value of adversity. And it's a quote from a wonderful book called My Losing Season by the author Pat Conroy. Sports books are always about winning because winning is far more pleasurable and exhilarating to read about than losing. Winning is wonderful in every aspect, but the darker music of loss resonates on deeper, richer planes. Loss is a fiercer, more uncompromising teacher, cold-hearted but clear-eyed, in its understanding that life is more dilemma than game and more trial than free pass. My acquaintance with loss has sustained me during the stormy passages of my life, when the pink slips came through the door, when the checks bounced at the bank, when I told my small children I was leaving their mother, when the despair caught up with me, when the dreams of suicide began feeling like love songs of release. Though I learned some things from the games we won that year, I learned much, much more from loss. We don't want bad things to happen to us, to happen to our loved ones, but we can actually approach loss with a positive mindset, and people with emotional intelligence are very able to do that. And I want to now do our final poll, which is which of these strategies, and this one is actually multiple choice, and that means you can say more than one of them. And this is our last poll, and basically my last slide. I'll give you my concluding slide and one final quick story, but I'll give you, let's say I'll go with a minute here. And again, you can choose more than one. Remember to scroll down so that you can see all the different choices. But which of these strategies do you find most useful in your own life in terms of thinking about emotional intelligence, in terms of thinking about happiness? And I will share the results. And then be thinking about your questions. Always excited to hear from you all. And you will get a copy of this slide deck sent out later today by Ashley or first thing tomorrow. I know she does a great job of sending out stuff to you all. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again in November for people who want to talk about a very different topic of bystanders. And let's see, over 50% of you have already participated. So that's, oh, we just hit 60%. And again, I will share the responses so you can see how other people are thinking. And again, you know, all of these are good strategies. Some of them probably will speak more to you than others. That's why I always give 10, because I like to make sure everyone's going to find something that kind of resonates with them. And we've hit over 70%. So in the interest of time, I'm going to count down from 5, and then I am going to close this poll. Last chance to get in your poll responses. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's see, and I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. And so I'm just scrolling down now. So the number one thing that people thought was useful is keeping stress in perspective. That was 59% of you said that one. So that was the number one. And about 50% of you said practice empathy, not sympathy. That was number 2. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing that. I'm going to do one final slide. And that is, I want to start where I began. So this is Andrew, my Spanish scholar. Andrew continued taking Spanish throughout high school. And at the end of high school, he came to me and my husband and he said, don't worry, I'm going to go to college. But before I go to college, I want to accomplish a personal goal. I want to become fluent in Spanish. So he spent, after graduating from high school, he spent a gap year living in Peru, living with a Peruvian family, herding donkeys and llamas and taking salsa dancing lessons. And he returned from that year fully bilingual. I am not bilingual. My husband is not bilingual. And he just graduated a year ago with a double major from college in psychology. And can you guess? Spanish. So again, that is the power of emotional intelligence, of leading people to be able to overcome things even when they don't initially go well. So thank you so much for listening. You're going to get a copy of my slides. Lots of this research is taken from my book, The Positive Shift, if people want to know more about the nitty gritty. And I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other better. But I'm going to put my website in your in the chat room in case anybody has a question that they don't have time to ask today. It's very easy to find me that way. And thank you all so much for listening. As you can tell, I love talking about psychology, and I really hope everyone got something that they can use. Thank you so much for the invitation to talk.
Yeah, I mean, this was, as always, amazing, and so many takeaways. There was a question that came in from Armand. Does charisma come in?
Ooh, that's such an interesting question. I'm trying to think about research that I've read on charisma. So certainly people who are high in charisma often have good social skills. They often are kind of able to get people to follow their lead, to kind of buy into their vision. There's really interesting research on leadership. Have you all had Lou come and talk to you?
No.
I'm going to give you another name
Okay.
from a one-day university person. He does a wonderful talk on leadership that I think people would really like, in which he talks about the differences in leadership. And in particular, one of the key predictors is, do people resonate with them? Do people think of them as charismatic? People who are charismatic tend to have an easier time getting people to kind of buy into their vision. And so that would suggest to me that there probably is an element of emotional intelligence in that, although I don't actually know of research that has made that link, but that's a really interesting question. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to Google that after I finish with you. So yes.
Okay, so Pat Potter asks, how do you learn to interpret nonverbal communication?
That's a great question. And this is one of the ones that I often kind of struggle with. So I think part of it, frankly, is really kind of paying attention. That for many of us, and this is actually just as kind of an aside, this is a little bit of like a Western culture, Eastern culture kind of thing. So there's really interesting cross-cultural research looking at Asian cultures. And in Asian cultures, people seem to learn very quickly, very readily, that you pay attention not to the words, the content, but to people's tone, body language, facial expression. So people might be like, yeah, that's a great idea. And in Japan, you'd be like, well, that's probably not a great idea. Listen to how the person said it. And in the United States, people are much more likely to be like, well, they said it was a great idea. There it is. And so what seems to be that we learn to prioritize different kinds of things. And so part of it is really kind of paying attention. How does the person look? Do they look comfortable? Do they look content? Or are their words kind of not really matching with their body language? This is one of the reasons why putting away the phone and not being distracted is so important, so that you're really kind of paying attention to subtle cues. Nonverbal cues are often much harder to pick up on because they are things like body language, facial expressions, eye contact, etc. And so really paying attention to that involves not trying to multitask, really trying to give your full attention to someone. And this is one of the key elements of like put away the phone. And we can all get better at it if we kind of prioritize, okay, I'm really going to sit and I'm really going to pay attention and listen to what this person is saying. Thank you for that.
Okay, and Gwen added that this was meaningful and helpful session for her, and thank you so much. She has plenty of room for improvement. From Gwen.
Well, thank you for that. And I will say that, for me as a mom and as a college professor, it drives me nuts because we talk so much about IQ, how are your grades? How are you, whatever. And you know what the reality is? Your grades are not the most important thing. Your SAT scores or your, ACT scores or whatever. What really is important is, can you get along? Can you function? And so I really so appreciate, as you can tell, this is very meaningful for me to give, because we need to pay more attention as a society to emotional intelligence. And I think Eileen might have had her hand up.
Yes, Eileen, go ahead.
So my question was going to be, before you even mentioned it, about put away the phone. Is it okay to ask a grandchild or ask a friend to please put away your phone? What are your thoughts on that?
100%. And let me say a couple things about that, Eileen. Thank you for asking that. Number one, my son, the Spanish scholar, had a really funny thing that he used to do with his friends, in which if they were at a restaurant, they would all put their phones in the middle of the table. And the first person to pick up their phone had to pay.
Great.
Good, right?
Yeah.
So there you go. First person to pick up the phone, checks on you. And they did that to put peer pressure on everyone to pay attention. Isn't that clever?
That's great. I love it.
And I guess no one
so
picked up the phone.
You can they don't pick up the phone, exactly. So
Right.
so Eileen, you could get your grandchild to now pay for everything, right? There
Right.
you go. Pick up your phone and then checks on you. And I'm going to order big. I'm going to get the lobster.
Right.
Love
And
that.
so, so that's just a simple example. But here's the other thing, is that it seems to be, and there's a really interesting study on this. And what they did was they had people have a phone on the table, but the phone was turned off. And what they found was even the presence of a phone, even if it was turned off, led people to be more distracted. They didn't pay as much attention because the phone's sitting there. You're like, oh, it might ring. Oh, it might vibrate. Oh, what am I missing out on? And so it's also really important to not just turn off the phone, but to put it away, to put it in a pocket or a jacket or, your purse or in the car, or, to really, really put it away, because the visual reminder of the phone is actually very, very jarring. It's why people, for example, should turn off the phone before they drive, right? Because you can be driving and then all of a sudden the phone rings and you're like, oh, wait, what is that? And then, you can have an accident or miss a red light or, whatever. So yeah, that was a long answer, Eileen, but a very good question.
I
Yeah.
will share that when my grandchildren were not driving yet, and I went to school to pick them up after school, and they both get in the car and they're both busy with their phones. And I said to them, you either could put the phones away and talk to me and tell me how your day was, or you could take the bus home from school. And, they never once used their phone in the car again.
Yeah, that's your own version of the restaurant, right?
Right.
Your own version of the restaurant, right? That's fine. Take the bus, go for it, right? You can use the phone all you want on the bus. Yeah, love it. Great example.
It was
That's a good one.
terrific. Thank you so much.
That's amazing. Frida, go ahead. If you want to unmute.
Good afternoon. I'm gonna piggyback with Eileen. I have 6 children and 14 grandchildren.
Wow.
And a lot of
Nice.
times, once in a blue moon, we all go out. And my second son sits in the edge and I sit in the front. And as soon as we're about to sit down, the first thing I tell everybody is, no cell phones. No cell phones. This is a family gathering.
Mhm.
This is my day. This is family day. This is priority. So would you please turn them off and put them away?
Mhm.
And my grandkids look at their parents, which is my grandkids, my kids.
Yeah.
And my kids would tell them, do what Beba says. Do it. She's the boss. And nobody picks up a phone until we have finished having dinner or luncheon. And
Mhm.
even afterwards, once
Mhm.
we leave, that's when I tell them, you guys can use your phone. But it's always been like that. I've always said,
Mhm.
family first, gatherings, the phones can wait.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I love that. And the reality is that's also helping you build more emotional intelligence in you and your children and your grandchildren. Because one of the key things, as I talked about at the very beginning, is that people high in emotional intelligence, they have better relationships. And you have better relationships by listening, by showing empathy, by doing that kind of perspective taking. And what we know is that the presence of cell phones is very distracting, and really hurts our ability to have authentic, meaningful conversations. That is what lets us build good relationships. So good for you.
And
Good-
I love to have conversation with all of them. That's
Mhm.
why I tell them, this is my time. I want to know what's going on. And we spend a couple of hours like that.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it.
Okay.